All right, it is time for Jamey Eisenberg start of the week, and that honor goes to Bo Nix because of a pretty, I would say, solid fourth quarter.
Say that again.
Giants. Is that your quarterback?
40 points. That's how I beat you in that fantasy
43.9 in week 7 because, by the way, he became the first player in NFL history. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns in a quarter. If it weren't for this guy, maybe I would have won.
Yes,
I had Jahmyr Gibbs, and I don't understand what happened, but now it's becoming more and more clear. Obviously, this warrants a start of the week from Jamey Eisenberg, so let's send it over to Jamey and the guys for the start of the week. Starts, sits, all the things.
I hope we get as much excitement about Bo Nix from everybody as we just got from Haley. And let's just get it through the entirety of the game as opposed to waiting for that fourth quarter performance as they came back and beat the Giants. 33-32, as you mentioned, Jacqueline, the 2 touchdowns on the ground, the 2 through the air. First player to ever do that. But now it's a great matchup, and he's been great at home. You go back to the last 11 games that he's played in Denver going back to last season. Over 28 fantasy points per game is what he averages. And the Cowboys have already given up some huge games of quarterbacks, 3 quarterbacks over 32 fantasy points per game. It's just set up so perfectly for Bo Nix. So coming off the big game, continues that at home. Heath, I know you share the same sentiment. We both like Bo Nix as a top 6 quarterback for this week.
Well, you just look at what quarterbacks have done against the Dallas Cowboys this year. They've kind of been up and down against the run. They've had some good performances. They've had some terrible performances. But it's been pretty uniformly awful against the pass. Should be a great week for Bo Nix.
And should be good for Cortland Sutton and a couple of his other wide receivers, and Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims as well. We'll talk about some starts and sits that we like. And let's look at the guys for me this week. And Daniel Jones is really in a great spot because every time he's been at home so far this season, he's been over 20 fantasy points, taking on a Titans team that he's already played once this season. Did not have a great game, but that was on the road. I think he's going to do whatever he wants to. As the Colts will do whatever they want to in what should be a good game. The Titans are down 2 of their key defenders in this matchup, Jeffrey Simmons and L'Jarius Sneed, so I like the setup there for him. A couple of receivers that I'm really excited about. T. Higgins. Now that Joe Flacco's the starter, we can go back to trusting T. Higgins again. 18 targets in his last 2 games. The Jets may not have Sauce Gardner. He's in the concussion protocol, but even if Gardner plays, the number 2 receiver opposite Gardner has been fantastic this season. Just look at it. Xavier Legette last week for the Panthers as Gardner took away Teteroa McMillan. And then Zay Flowers, this is what we've been waiting for. We're waiting for Lamar Jackson to come back. We saw in the first 3 games of the season when Jackson played the majority of those games, 14.4 PPR points or more, and the Bears have just been terrible against number 1 wide receivers. Chris Olave, for example, last week going off for 2 touchdowns. So love the setup for Flowers now that Lamar Jackson's going to be back. All right, Dave's not in studio with us, but Dave, what do you got from a start perspective for week number 8?
Let's go to Jackson Dart, who's been pretty hot. You got to give him credit for the way that he has played quarterback and delivered for fantasy managers, but his rushing has a big reason for that. 10 fantasy points with his legs in 3 of his past 4 games. There's been some fluky passing moments, but he's making it work, and I think he's going to have to throw against Philadelphia. This is going to be a better Eagles defense than he went up against 2 weeks ago, but I still think he'll do his thing on the ground and through the air. Top 12 quarterback this week. I do like Bo Nix much better. Tyler Algier is a name that we normally don't talk about as a fantasy starter, but 3 or 4 times this year when he's had at least 10 carries, he's come through with at least 9.8 non-PPR fantasy points. I think the Falcons are going to run all over the Dolphins. Pretty much everybody has this season. And so Tyler Algier, if you're in a pinch at running back, could come through for 10, maybe 12 fantasy points, depending on your league scoring. And then Romeo Doubs, 8 or more targets in each of his past 3 games, 10.5 or more PPR points in each of his past 3 games. Should have had a deep touchdown last week. Jordan Love just missed him, but those 2 have been connecting really well. This is the number 1 receiver for Green Bay, and we know that the Steelers' pass defense has not played well really over the balance of the season, but certainly last week they got exposed. I think Green Bay will take advantage. Romeo Doubs, a top 24 wide receiver.
Should be interesting to see if Christian Watson's able to return, but obviously the targets for Doubs have been fantastic, and the matchup, as Dave alluded to, is great as well. All right, Heath, you like the old man. Joe Flacco's back. Is he a must-start quarterback this week?
I am back in on Joe Flacco. What could go wrong? He was awesome 2 years ago in Cleveland. He was awesome, good last year in Indianapolis. He's thrown 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in 2 games with the Bengals. You got Jamar Chase. You got T. Higgins. Most importantly, he's getting rid of the ball. 2.22 seconds to get rid of the ball for Joe Flacco in 2 games with the Bengals. It was 2.79 seconds with the Browns. That's a huge difference in terms of when pressure arrives. Start him. He's been good for Chase Brown also. 7.5 yards per carry the last 2 weeks for Brown with Flacco under center. 2.5 yards per carry before that. Now, the volume goes down for Brown. I'm not sure he's going to be a starter rest of the season, but the landscape of running back this week, you start Chase Brown. You also start Wan'Dale Robinson. Listen, we're going to love Wan'Dale Robinson if Darius Slayton remains out. He's averaged over 13 fantasy points per game with Jackson Dart, without Darius Slayton. He had 20 fantasy points against this same defense just 2 weeks ago. He is a borderline top 12 wide receiver for me without Darius Slayton. If Slayton's back, he's still a low-end number 2 wide receiver. And Cade Otton, without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin, we saw this last year, we're seeing it this year. Cade Otton just becomes pretty close to a must-start tight end for Baker Mayfield.
Top 5 guy for me this week, and again, no Chris Godwin, no Bucky Irving as well, so the Bucs trying to make things work with what they got, and Cade Otton's been very good filling in for them, so love the setup for him. All right, let's go from the positive to the negative, and we'll talk about some sits for this week. And for me, I'm just a little bit nervous about Kamani Vidal. 6 teams are on a bye, so he's still ranked in the top 24, so he's more of a cautionary start or cautionary sit, however you want to frame it. He's the bust alert and start him, sit him, but I just don't like the setup for him against the Vikings. They only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns on the season to running backs. He was great against the Dolphins. I think Heath, myself, Dave, we could all run against the Dolphins. So Kamani Vidal, throw out that performance. I think what we saw last week is something you should be a little bit concerned about Colts run defense, a little bit closer to the Vikings run defense. So I'm just concerned about calling Vidal a must-start running back. Again, if you can sit him, I would do so. And I would definitely sit Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Had the great game against the Chargers, but the last 2 matchups have been absolutely disgusting for him. And speaking of disgusting, this is what the Chiefs have done to the last 3 running backs they faced. Travis Etienne, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Ashton Genty. That trio was held to 8.8 PPR points or less in each game against Kansas City. This game could get ugly quickly, and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Bill, may not have a great game. In the case of Jalen Waddle, very difficult to sit him, but you are talking about a difficult matchup against A.J. Terrell and the Falcons defense, and they've been great against opposing number 1 wide receivers. They've held Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, one other top wide receiver, I forget his name at the moment, I apologize, but it's 11.1 PPR points or less, so they've done a great job in limiting opposing number 1 guys. And Tua Tagovailoa has 6 interceptions in his last 2 games. I don't love the setup for the Dolphins passing. I don't love the setup for the Dolphins in general. I think it could be bad for Jalen Waddle, so if you can sit him this week, again, very difficult, I would try to do so. All right, Dave, who are we sitting in week 8?
Jordan Love is at the top of the list. He's an okay start, I guess, but I can find 12 or 13 other quarterbacks I'd rather start ahead of Jordan Love. I know it sounds silly because Romeo Doubs a big-time start, Jordan Love not. I don't know how much throwing Jordan Love is going to do. The Packers' MO is typically to play at a relatively slow pace, run the football. I think they're going to be able to accomplish those things against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jordan Love is an okay start, just not one of my top 12 guys. Tony Pollard's really been terrible ever since Tyjae Spears has come back. 12 touches in each game, 108 total yards in those games with no touchdowns. He was saved last week by an uncharacteristic 6 catches. I don't think we can count on that. I think as soon as the Colts build a lead, we will see very little of Tony Pollard. I like Tyjae Spears better in even non-PPR over Tony Pollard this week. And then Xavier Worthy. In 5 games over the past 2 years, when both Worthy and Rashee Rice have played, they've each run 77 routes. One of them is 24 targets. One of them is 10 targets. I bet you could guess which one is which. Rice is the one who's been dominating with targets. Worthy more of a boomer bust flex play, not somebody that I could call a top 24 guy. As much as Jamey doesn't like Jalen Waddle, and I get it, I'm not a big fan of Waddle either, I'd still start him ahead of Xavier Worthy.
The only thing I think we talked about this, Heath, on our podcast today, like they could give Worthy a couple of plays, and I think you said the phrase is apropos. Everybody eats.
That's their mantra there in Kansas City. When you talk to Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, they're not worried about one game. Everybody's going to eat. I think you could be right, but it's hard just looking at the numbers of what Worthy's been with Rice and starting him confident.
Oh, totally. I think Dave's on the right path here. Just I would not be surprised if we get a play or two that Xavier Worthy, like we talked about, could be like a George Pickens, where 1 or 2 plays can certainly make his night there Monday night against the
flex play at best. Wouldn't you guys say that he's a flex play at best?
Well, it's 6 teams on a bye. He's probably a top 20 wide receiver for a lot of people, and maybe even a number 1 guy in a lot of people's rosters. All right, Heath, so you're a little concerned about the Bears. They're taking on the Ravens, and the Ravens are getting healthy.
Yes, and it's kind of the same situation. Listen, I think Caleb Williams, there are enough QB options this week. I would start Joe Flacco against him. I don't think the Ravens defense that you're going to see after the bye is the Ravens defense that we saw before the bye. And even the last game before the bye, they were pretty good against the Rams, a better offense than the Bears. But Rome Odunze is the guy that has me on an island. An island is usually more enjoyable. I just have anxiety about this one. But we've seen several troubling things. Obviously, the Bears have gone more run-heavy the last couple of weeks since they came back from the bye. Rome Odunze's target share went from 27% before the bye to 20% after the bye, and Jacob Gibbs had a really good segment on Beyond the Box Score talking about how his first read rate has gone way down since the bye as well. They're just not looking to him as the first target. He's right for me in that same area as Waddle and Worthy. I understand a lot of you, with people on buys, you have to start him. You shouldn't feel that bad about it. If you're in a 3-wide receiver league, he's a start. But I would start 2 of the guys on my start list, Wan'Dale Robinson and Romeo Doubs, over Rome Odunze this week. I'm also sitting Chuba Hubbard. It was encouraging to a lot of people that he had more snaps than Rico Dowdle last week. He's facing the Buffalo Bills. They've been awful against the run all year. I just don't think that we can trust they're going to play Chuba Hubbard more than Rico Dowdle after they did it 1 week, and Dowdle continued to be much better than Chuba Hubbard. I consider Dowdle a must start. Hubbard more of a flex. I would also like to get away from TJ Hawkinson. He's had some okay games. He lives in that 9 to 10 fantasy point range, and maybe you're just okay with that, but this is an awful matchup against Derwin James and the Chargers.
I think we feel a little bit different about Hawkinson if he had scored the touchdown last week, but I'm with you. I think there's just so many good streaming tight ends out there, from Mason Taylor to Harold Fannin to Dalton Schultz and Aronde Gasson, just a lot of eyes that you can play over TJ Hawkinson. All right, make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found. We'll be breaking down the NFC home games on Friday, got through the AFC home games on Thursday. Don't forget Sunday morning, we're back at 11 a.m. Eastern, getting you set for everything you need on Sunday for week number 8. Remember, 6 teams on a bye, lots of injuries. We'll have you covered with all the latest news. The Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found.